I was talking about some of the models that you might think are a bit dated. Um, Absolutely not the case. And the reason I say that is that most of our theories and concepts are rooted in what we refer to as seminal works. If you take Taylor's management science, some people say, well, that's old and so on, that's going back to Fordism and so on and so forth. Yes, that's where it evolved. But what it's essentially propagated at the time was manufacturing processes. We do things in mass manufacture and so on, and we follow these routines or procedures and processes. What are we singing about today? Processes. So all of this stuff is if you go back through the DNA, if you do the ancestry.com of any model or concept, you will find the roots going back into what we refer to as seminal works. So never be afraid to use, just because some people say, oh, you have to use the latest and greatest concepts and so on. They're not the greatest by any stretch of the imagination. They're just variations of the Delta variant of the original COVID of the species, essentially. So that's it's a very important point to remember when you're looking at various models and concepts in any discipline that we're looking. And showing the fundamentals of where things, the original of the species, so to speak. So tonight, let me get moving on this. And open up what we have for tonight, which is a nice topic of followership. So, of course, we've done the leadership and elements of it. And I know you will be overlapping with Dave and some of the leadership and leadership styles. And as we said on Saturday, most importantly, one of your style has to match the dynamics of the context or the situation that you're in. And that's fundamentally why I particularly like Hershey Blanchard's situational leadership. It's dynamic. This does cause problems for both the leader and the follower. And we'll begin to see some of these coming out here. Not so much the problems, but how we can be more effective. We'll look at the positives of this complete understanding of the symbiosis, for all intents and purposes, between leader and manager. And as I say, we often overlook this link in business. So a brief history in time of the origins and all of this. So, and for sure, there had been very limited literature on the follower concept. And one of these writers, this lady, Mary Parker Follett, it was neither a leader or nothing much. If you weren't a leader, anything else wasn't of much importance, and so on. Great man theories and the theories, and how he's a great man, and this, that, and the other thing. They were the concept. Now, where did this all originate from? And it's not from Mary Parker Follett in 1960. If we think back and go right back again to the point I was making about seminal works and scientific management, first production systems, Fordisms, Taylorism, and all that sort of stuff. The owners and managers in organizations, it was pretty much the preserve of the elitists in society, and the rest of us were the poorly or non-educated, and we did as we were told. That didn't start just there. It would have had its roots in military, should we say, behavior, the chain of command, and so on. And if you come right up to today, the places like West Point, Cranfield in university, they would have been well, West Point still is a military academy, and Cranfield is now a university, and it specialized in operations, supply chain and logistics and all that sort of stuff. And it morphed into Cranfield morphed into one of the best universities in the world for that subject matter, supply chain and so on. Again, borrowing from its heritage of military operations and that. Go across the water and we go into West Point, and the original concepts of these strict chains of command and so on, that they tore up that manual a number of years ago, and started to recognize the value of the soldiers in the field and their feedback. So the old movie perception or concept of the generals and colonels sitting back in the war room and giving directions, and the World War II black and white movies and all that sort of stuff, and the bunkers and giving directions, those days are long since gone. Why? Because the soldiers, the so-called followers, are in the actual theater of war, in the situation at that point in time. They understand the dynamics in front of them. So they rewrote manuals, operational manuals, to enable the soldiers to make their own decisions on the ground and feedback information at the same time. So and you'd say, well, that makes common sense. Yes, but it wasn't always practiced in that respect. They were told just charge the hill, and there might have been, several overhangs that it doesn't make it easy to charge the hill because the actual commanding officers weren't in the spot. That kind of simplicity, and now because of warfare being far more complicated and so on, so it made it on. Point I'm making is that ultimately, followers are equally as important as the leaders in any case. And here we kind of go again, the great men theory, from Second World War, hierarchical authoritarian structures, military structures and so on, to conquer the enemy, Roosevelt, Churchill, these persons. And then in the 80s, global economy, technology, and changing dynamics of the workforce. And fundamentally, the changing dynamics probably started maybe 10, 15, 20 years before that, in education. And it was through the 60s, as we know, in Ireland, we started to see free education. It was the preserve of those who could afford it up to that point in time. Even secondary school was expensive and to get people into. But with the availability of education, it enabled people to be better informed. And that's fundamentally what it comes down to. The more informed people are, the better educated they are, and therefore collectively we can make better decisions. And that's the whole point behind, what should we say, this leader followership theory and practice. This lady went on to say, we need when the need arose for a more active follower, the model of the omniscient leader and obedient passive follower or subordinate was too entrenched to allow those subordinates to embrace a new role of active followership. So the image of the drab, powerless masses that Burns described as followers in his historic leadership literature was slow to change. And that's fundamentally, in other words, the perception, the omniscient perception of the leader, the know-all. The manager in an organization, not the leader, the manager, that he knows everything and does everything and conducts and controls everyone below him. That was the perception, and of course, people followed blindly along with their diktat. So the process we have, quite simply, leadership and followership, and we have leader, follower, and then we have non-leader. So the opposite to a leader is a non-follower, and the opposite to a non-follower is a non-leader. If you follow me in this, so leadership and followership is neither or proposition. Followership is not the opposite of leadership. The opposite of both is non-leader and non-follower. Okay, sounds confusing, but it's a simple thing. It's all it is. It's choice. You either choose to lead or you choose to follow. And if you choose not to, then you become a passive follower. Okay? You're still part of the team, but you become a passive follower. And we'll see when we look at the followership types later on. So, and again, this kind of mirrors what I was saying on Saturday when we talk about leaders and followers and the context, the dynamic or the environment. hence situation. So the process changes. And this is the interesting point about this is that the follower could just as easily become the leader, depending on the situation. Remember the example I gave you where the young engineers joining Ericsson, and they had the older guys who would have been seen as the leaders, the natural leaders inside in the place, having with all their experience years and so on and so forth. They became the followers to the young kids. So it flipped because of the context, the dynamics, new technology, disruptive technology. Eventually that pared back again, and the older guys, the uptake was faster with the older technicians as time went on. So just by way of, the leadership is an intricate, oh God, sorry, I'm after hitting something open here that I shouldn't have done. Okay. So leadership is the intricate relationship between, and there lies the point. It's not so much intricate relationship, but complex, and there are multiplicity of complexities, given the different natures of one-on-one relationships within a group. So 7 people to 1 leader, you can have a whole. I don't know if exponentially you could be looking at a factorize 7 in terms of the number of potential relationships, and then the dynamic of the environment that can change that relationship. So somebody could be, you might have to be in a telling format in 1 week, and when people come bring up their skills, you're in a delegating format possibly the following week, because someone has mastered a skill in a very short period of time. So the relationship over time changes as well. So not only do you have the complexities, but you throw in the time dimension, things change, so the relationships change. So therefore we look at these as complex adaptive systems in by way of descriptor. So followers and leaders are roles, and that's probably and they say current thinking. Well, this slide deck would be a few years old, and going back to my days when, and in contracting, when I was out in on assignment with Ericsson back over in Germany, this was a kind of approach we were taking as department managers and so on and so forth inside there. And the interesting dynamic that caused that, for me anyway, was that the guys that were working in my department, they were highly qualified. They were more qualified than me technically. And my challenge was to have a clear set of objectives, and to harness their abilities and keep it focused, keep it channeled. Hence the Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, and Fleetwood Mac diagram. So my idea was to be the lens to focus their talents, and by geez, I can the challenges been just to stay one step ahead of these guys, because they were fast on the uptake. Why? Because they were much older graduates. They were in their mid-20s coming out of college. Why was that? Because they do their national service, and as a consequence they're more mature and so on and so forth. I mean, compared to our students, for example, they're a lot older and mature. It's a 2 years, at least 1 year national service. We did have one young chap on our team, and he was originally Turkish extraction, and not extracted from Turkey. He was his parents were from Turkey, and he was naturalized German citizen. But there was a deal done where the company can buy out the national service and all that sort of stuff. And as long as he stays with the company, he doesn't have to serve at all then. And he was young at 23 years of age. But most of the guys and a handful of ladies were in the mid-20s. The point I'm making was that as a leader, I didn't see myself as the know-all. You couldn't possibly, because we were dealing with new technologies, very, very competent people. So my role was slightly different than the traditional manager, as we would like to think of ourselves at the time. But for me, going back, and if I reflect back in that time, it made perfect sense, because I just saw myself as just another team player. And you see this coming through, later on, why that should we say attitude is important. And I specifically use attitude because we can be overwhelmed and um, self-ego massaging by getting the title of manager because of perceptions. These are historic perceptions that have been ingrained in us, that a manager is the be all and end all. They are not. Managers, leaders are not be all and end all. They're part of the overall equation. They are not the opposite side of the equation as such. So followers are active, not passive, and of course now, because people are far more contributing in solving problems and coming up with solutions and seen as on a par or being equal in a team for all intents and purposes. So followers and leaders share a common purpose, of course, to achieve objectives, and then the relational nature of followers and leaders. That will change as a consequence of how we behave in these preceding points. Excuse me. So the role should be defined by the context, the situation. Don't pigeonhole people. He's a follower, he's an exemplary follower, he's a shaper, he's this, he's an evaluator. Don't. That's the whole complexity of it. Things are dynamic. They move around. Someone can be a shaper in a plant, and then based if the conversation or the situation it moves over into their level of expertise, they can be the evaluator, or they can be the, what's the other one? I can never think of it. Well, the person that has the expertise that can contribute more, and then when it goes out of their domain as such, the spotlight goes off them. They could come back and become a little bit more evaluative in terms of, now I've thrown in my tuppence worth, here's let me hear what other people have to say, and so on. So the spotlight moves around within the group itself. And then most managers play the roles of leader and follower precisely. In other words, for example, in a simple situation of where you're solving problems, you might have convened a meeting. You might have said, this is an issue we need to address on our production process, and bringing in all the people that are impacted or on your team. And Mark over there might have, well, I've seen this process here, and we use this in a different company, and this is how it worked there, and so on. So he takes leadership because he's now explicating a piece of knowledge that we might not have had available to us. In other words, how they did it in another company, and someone else might have something to contribute from their past experiences. So the kind of leadership and it goes into they convene and they control the pace of how they disseminate and communicate what they know, their knowledge essentially. And you as a leader, you're taking the backseat. You're not sitting there at the head of the table trying to control everything, because you have that kind of even the physical perception of of a head of the table and everyone sitting down on opposite sides. That in itself, that even changed. We started putting round tables in, for heaven's sake. We even started putting stand-up tables in meeting rooms, so that we could break down this manager-follower perception, just to make it a little bit more fluid and to underpin this concept of it being a role inside in a team. So the role should be defined by the context and such. So again, if we look at the active passive side, and these are important insofar as that they're not just manual labor or loyalty. It's not just about it. So passive. So followers keep leaders in control of the situation. Why? Because they give feedback. So again, the feedback might not be me saying to my department manager or leader or whomever, saying, that's all wrong, you're doing that wrong, and so on and so forth. It might be in the way I execute my duties. I might be very reluctant, but I'm doing it. But I might be hesitant, and as a leader, you have to be able to pick up those non-verbal communications, those signals, and say, there's something not right. Why is he not his usual buzz and enthusiastic way of doing things? There's something not right. That in itself can be feedback to a leader. But fundamentally, it's a two-way communication structure. So the leader has to be able to pick up on all these nuances, as well as the follower picking up from the leader, and the levels of assuredness that a leader might be exhibiting, and the clarity of the goals that are well communicated. These are important for followers as well, so they have clear visibility of what's expected of them and where the team is going, and what they're trying to achieve. So engagement, commitment, and discretionary efforts are choices, which I fundamentally mentioned there by saying, that I'm not too enthusiastic about doing this particular job. I might not just do it at all. It might be totally outside my capabilities, or I'm not interested in doing it because I don't see any benefit. I'm more than capable of doing it. The S4s, well, in this case, R3, R4, R3, R2 type of follower or readiness. So shared common purpose, clearly, and here's the example here, success of the organization's goals and each other. So everyone is an integral part of the team itself. So followers force leaders to be followers. So again, giving the feedback, and looking at this graphic here, or the picture, a couple of guys in probably a basketball match or whatever, and they have their gameplay, and now they're probably tearing up the gameplay book because the guys are outside there and saying that, listen, these guys are a little bit stronger here. Same in rugby, we're getting the different results, or someone gets injured, we have to change dynamically, and therefore we have the feedback. And if you tell the coach on the sideline at halftime, look, this isn't working for us, our gameplay isn't working out for us, and the coach say, yeah, I can see that. What do you think is happening? We need to be able to. They're stronger on this side. These guys have improved their push, or have improved their defense on this side. We need to move to the other side, and so on. So he's getting first-hand information back, so they can collectively make a decision of what tactics they'll change in the second half, and so on. So the clarity of goals and purpose matter. What's the objective? Win a game, and how we're going to do it. So relational nature. We'll talk about mutual influence, so that there's a kind of a coming together of how a follower and a leader can influence each other's behavior. Again, that can be simply through feedback or actions. And if you look at this graphic example of it here, you have Wozniak and Steve Wozniak here, and Jobs. Partnership would equal weight. Okay, technically they were 50-50, but in our public perception of it, it looked totally about Jobs. In terms of Apple and so on, so he got most of the external publicity as such, whereas Wozniak was the brains behind the most of the computing in the organization. So self-concept. So what do we think of ourselves as followers? Do we feel, for example, that we're part of a winning team? Are we part of the leader's success? Now, there would have been some issues between these two guys, and probably part of the reason why they had this love-hate relationship over time, but deeply rooted, a strong friendship had developed between both of them. There was a certain respect for each other's opinions, and they fought clearly. But in terms of the generics of this relationship, or relational nature, we need to understand that where do I see myself from the leader's perspective? In other words, the 6 and the 9. Put myself in his shoes. What does he see in me? And what do I see in him? So we try and swap around our roles. Hence the value of reflective practice. This is how we can, and empathy, more importantly, emotional intelligence, how we can swap around. If I was in his position, this is how I would do it, and so on. So the self-concept of followers matters in this context. Okay. Everything is okay. Just moving on. Sorry about that. Yep, here we are. So we have purpose followers and leaders. So now the different types of followers. We have pragmatic followers. We have conformists, passive followers. We have effective followers, and we have alienated followers. And generically, that's how we describe them. So let's have a look at the top two, alienated and effective. They'd be considered to be independent, critical thinkers, and the bottom ones would be dependent, uncritical thinkers. So it's pretty self-evident by their descriptors. When you have a passive that they're and conformist, whatever, I'll just do it, and I'll tell me what to do, and I'll go ahead and do it. Conformist and passive, you know, they don't want to do any thinking as such. They'll just go ahead and do it, similarly to conformists. Conformists just don't like any hassle or trouble, and so on. For passive, even less so. But if we just move down through them, alienated followers, critical, independent thinking, but fulfill the role without enthusiasm. Interesting. Without enthusiasm. Are often cynical and disgruntled. As we say, very well balanced. They have a chip on both shoulders. And then you have, they distance themselves from the organization and ownership of its mission, and may have experienced an obstacle or setback back within an organization and have given up. So they're you know, they got their fingers burnt. They tried to be enthusiastic, tried to be contributive, and so on, and they didn't feel they were getting the recognition, the rewards, or for that matched the effort in their eyes. Okay. Again, this is where the emotional maturity will come into it, because they might say, well, really, it was only a small contribution, so my expectations were disproportionate to the actual overall contribution that I was making in that particular instance. May have been the case, but then again, that's important for the follower to understand. Distance themselves from the organization and ownership of its mission. They don't feel part of the I won't say the team, but the overall company. They'll go in, they get paid, they do the work, they do their bits and pieces with their immediate team. They have a good social interaction, and so. But do they care where the company is going? No, not necessarily. Passive followers. They do not exhibit independent thinking or active participation. Limit their activity to what they are told to do, and are often the result of leaders who are over-controlling of others and who punish mistakes. Where did we discuss this not so long ago? Toxic leadership. Conformist followers are sometimes called yes men, and God knows we know a few of those around. Actively participate but do not use critical thinking skills, and typically carry out all duties without question, and participate willingly but do not consider consequences, and are concerned only with avoiding conflicts. And then pragmatic followers. I know I'm flying through these because there's quite a bit to get through. They have qualities of all followership styles. Okay, so they're dynamic. They can go in and out. This is where the emotional intelligence fits in, depending on what fits the current situation. So they're able to read the leaders. They're able to read the situation, more importantly. They use whatever style best benefits their own position and minimizes their own risk. So sometimes it's, the expression, shut up and put up. Sometimes we have to bite our lips, another expression. And sometimes we know when not to open our mouths. That's what we're alluding to here. It was 2 years ago. No, actually, it wasn't last year because of COVID. Actually, it was this time last year. Not this time last year, but the year before. I remember one of my colleagues coming in, and he was sitting on the academic council, and he was making a suggestion. And he came into the office, and he said, Jesus, for heaven's sake, I get landed with this on this committee to do this, that, and the other thing. And I just started laughing. I said, you spoke at the meeting, didn't you? He said, yeah, how did you know? You weren't there. And I said, I know. The minute you open your mouth, I said, you're going to be targeted. And I said, there are times when you need to keep your mouth shut. And that's often the case, just bite your lip, or you will get some managers only love those opportunities. Oh, gee, fair play, Mark, up you go. Would you take that on? And you think you're coming out there and white-haired boy. You're just been landed with anyway, a hamper full of stuff. So use whatever style that best fits, and do not state their opinion on issues affecting the organization. So they again, keeping their mouths shut. And will not take a stand. So are difficult to trust. Now that's the interesting thing, because you can't read them. You can't tell whether you can trust them to complete a task or to should I say, play ball with the team for all intents and purposes. Alienated followers, critical but passive, cynical and sarcastic, unmet expectations, goals changes, and broken trust. And anyway, no, I had another one I was going to use. But he looks like the fellow I was thinking about, and I won't mention anything about soccer. I see a couple of smiling faces, so I think you're on the same. Again, this is trying to do leadership followership on online, so I'm looking for reactions. You know what I'm talking about. But cynical and sarcastic. Let's move on. So moving from alienated. So what we ultimately like to try and get are towards the exemplary follower. That's, I won't say the perfect, but the exemplary follower. So get over unmet expectations. So things didn't happen. Remember, I mentioned it before. I might have had higher expectations relative to the situation, and therefore I felt they were unmet in a previous organization or a previous experience. So when we reflect on, we're saying, well, actually, I was disproportionately expecting higher than would have been absolutely realistic as such. Engage the leader about broken trust. So alienated followers, active but so conformist followers are active but not critical thinkers, accept assignments and never ruffle the feathers. Domineering leaders as a consequence of that's who they work for, generally speaking. Bureaucracy and hierarchy plays a big part. Again, the bureaucracy of doing things. Is bureaucracy a bad thing? Absolutely not. It means that you're just one of many doing the same types of tasks for all intents and purposes. But hierarchy, inheriting from the structural military type organization. So we just do as we're told. We conform to the old hierarchy. So how do we move from conformists to followers? Watch healthy conflict. So conformists, you see, so okay, these two are going head to head, but they're being very constructive. They're not taking each other's heads off. They're not shouting and roaring and all that sort of stuff, but they're very calm, cohesive, articulated points. So we watch that kind of, and we can see how two others might be bouncing off each other. So to use the expression, two intellectual heads going at it for all intents and purposes, and we watch how that evolves as opposed to two guys having an out and out punch up to try and win the day. And find a safe place to practice. So, with one of your colleagues now, and I wouldn't suggest down in the bar after about a half dozen pints that you get into a healthy conflict, because I can guarantee it won't end up healthy. But having colleagues and getting into good, healthy debates. One nice little technique is, getting into, for example, debating societies, and you say, Jesus, here, Mark, come on, for heaven's sake, this age in our lives and so on. Still, it's great for public speaking, and it's great for Toastmasters for that in particular, but it can. Toastmasters is good as well when you want to get up and speak about something that you might not be familiar with, but boost your confidence and so on. But more practically, you might have some colleagues that you want to bounce some ideas, practicing your interviews, for example, and they might get a little bit adversarial in the types of questions that they're asking you, and tell them to do so. That way you can start building or get into a discussion about something that's work related, preferably. Active or critical depends on the wins. So pragmatist followers. So they read situations very, very carefully. That's the one thing about pragmatists. Again, it's predicated on their emotional intelligence and how quickly they can see and assimilate the environment around them. You might lack credibility, they're unstable situation, and leaders who play politics. So they're watching all of these, and notice the nuances now. We're beginning to get into the subtleties of the leadership styles, which the pragmatist can actually evaluate more effectively. So watching for leaders so they're almost one step ahead of the leaders in many respects. They can see what way a leader is trying to steer or manage or push a particular agenda at a meeting, for example. And there you have the Holy Trinity. Well, that's not fair on the Clintons. So moving from pragmatist to the exemplary. So find your passion and purpose and rebuild your credibility. So find out what you're good at, what you really enjoy doing, and the rest will follow. I mean, it was one of the, how to say, the life lessons I would have given to my own three kids was, find something that you really enjoy doing and just do it, and the rewards will follow. If money is your god, then forget it. If it's all about getting money for your flash car, your apartment, your 3 holidays a year, and all that sort of crap, then you're on the lost, hiding to nothing. And I say the same to my undergrads inside. Find something that, because the rewards actually follow, because really good leaders and some managers will spot your commitment, your capabilities, and so on, and the companies will reward you for that. It's as my dad used to say to me, find a pastime that pays for itself, and that's essentially it. So passive followers, passive and uncritical thinking, not doing much about anything, maybe a response to management style, and don't want to be a follower. Okay, so passive followers, they're just there, they exist. Anyway, moving from passive to exemplary, this is the hardest jump. So learn that what followership means for so again, from a leader's perspective, dealing with passive followers, it's a real challenge and can take up a lot of time, because it may mean additional resources, more programming, more programs, more development, and so on. That might be the carrot. The stick might be these. I mentioned it in my video, but they're a couple of years old now, and they're still in use. But these things, these pips, you might have come across them, or hopefully not personally, but I've heard of them. These professional improvement plans, I think that's what they're referred to, not the personal insolvency thingy, but the professional improvement plans, and some bright sparks in HR. I hope there's no HR people here. It doesn't matter anyway. In American-based companies decided that this is how they were going to put experienced people under the spotlight and say, you're not hitting your targets, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, and we're going to put you on a PIP, and they go through all. It's almost like a disciplinary process, but it's often used as a mechanism to get rid of people, and that's the danger of them. But in any case, that's the carrot side, that's the stick side of that's crept into to companies in the last 6-7 years or thereabouts. I don't particularly like that approach. I think a manager or leader is there to enable staff, and we see this coming up, to perform to their utmost all the time. Now you might say to me, but there are some staff that are not going to, no matter how many times you beat them with the stick, they're still not. Well, if you have an effective appraisal system inside in an organization, you will be able to set goals for them to be able to achieve, and if they don't achieve, then you will have to show them the door. But anyway. So who are, or what are exemplary followers? They're active and critical, goal missions focused, critical path activists, take initiative, add value authentically, and are courageous, conscientious, or conscience, courageous, conscious. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but when we say up here active and critical, it's one word that we have an issue. It's perception. When we say someone is to critique something, a lot of students, not yourselves now, but certainly undergrads, fall into the trap of having to criticize. That's not what it means. It's and you quite clearly would know that. To critique something is to look at the pros and the cons and present a point of view, an independent, well-informed point of view. That's what exemplary followers, in terms of critical thinking. They look at both so they're active in doing that. Goal and mission focus is straightforward. Critical path activists, so they look for the important stuff on the critical path. That's borrowed from project management. Any of those items on the critical path are the ones that can affect the overall time frame of a project. So if you shorten, or as the expression goes, crash the project, it means you can shorten the project if you focus on reducing time on any critical path activity. That way you can expedite a solution, be a lot faster with problem solving and so on. And then they take initiative, they go about it because they can spot these opportunities or solutions or better mechanisms or processes for finding a solution and so on. So they don't sit back and wait for others to do it, essentially, adding value and straightforward. So characteristics of effective followers: work towards competency, solutions, and positive impact, contribute with enthusiasm and support leaders, do not avoid risk or conflict. So they do have a little bit of from time to time, they'll have a bit of a healthy discussion, debate with others in the team and with the leaders themselves. Now, on the extreme side of this, you could almost call the pragmatist like the can be on occasion the black sheep, and might be seen as passive or and definitely passive, no interest and so on. For often that can be misinterpreted because they're pointing out the failings. They're pointing out issues that the conformists, and we all tend to fall into this conformist at times under this concept of group think. And we even though we're full of enthusiasm, we're almost in the exemplary zone, but groupthink can affect the team's efficiency. And having someone that's on the outside, the black sheep, so to speak, as we often refer to them, can actually corral that and break it down and slow down the pace going off in that direction, and maybe readjust it by saying that won't work because this reason, and that won't work because of that reason, and so on. So they're a bit of a check mechanism against the group think. So they're very healthy, and sometimes we can, other team members can say, geez, Mark is always moaning and whinging and giving out about this, that, and the other thing. Which couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not speaking of myself personally, but that person, Mark the black sheep person, might be extremely valuable for that purpose, that they can identify the pitfalls, the potholes, and so on of a particular course of actions a lot faster than the team or other team members. So they have the courage to initiate change and to serve the best interests of the organization or the team itself, and then are able to identify strengths and weaknesses in themselves and in the organization. So in other words, they know when to speak, when not to speak, when to offer, and if they're in any doubt about something, if they don't feel they have all the information, they won't proffer a solution or input into a problem-solving situation. They'll want more data before they jump in and contribute and so on, and that's fine. That's good. It just shows that there's a depth of maturity and thinking, and in terms of critical thinking. So obligations of the effective followers: they accept responsibility, very important point, as should leaders, for the actions taken for the group and themselves. Challenge authority, which kind of the last point I mentioned or briefed on. Participate in change, and they serve the needs of the organization. And then they leave the organization when necessary. Now, if you remember my early days when I met you first, I told you that one of my professional rules, behaviors, or oddities was that whenever I took on a role in an organization, once I was in there, my immediate goal was to make myself redundant. Now, of course, I don't mean out of a job. I mean, make that role redundant. And I was fortunate enough to be in that type of situation a number of times, where I went in and the whole idea was to break it down, take it out, and be able to delegate parts of the combined role to other people to let them move up inside the organization by adding little bits to their, should we say, CVs or competency profiles as such. And then it was my boss's problem. I was a thorn in the side, and in a couple of them saying, what are we going to do with you now, Mark? And so on and so forth, you know. So, but I got certain satisfaction out of that, not being a thorn in the side, but by trying to make things easier, uncomplicated, and then move on to the next task or the next challenge. And that's how I got my own satisfaction of in terms of being a follower and being conformist or being exemplary, whatever the case may be, but certainly a lot more of the pragmatist in that respect. So to move on, and that's important when to leave the organization. One that comes to mind was, you remember Morris Pratt, when he was in head of CNC, he stepped down before retirement, said, look, I can't give any more to this organization. I've taken it as far as I can. Directly in with myself and some of my colleagues in Meteor, we were the middle third of the growth phase of the company, from greenfields to technology growth and then for market growth. And we were the middle third. We knew that our days were numbered when we started to move to the next phase and so on. So we all parted companies when someone to, well, we were with the parent company called Western Wireless, and our CEO, he went to New Zealand. My immediate boss went to Chamonix Valley, where he bought a small hotel and just wanted to go skiing for the rest of his days. Muggins here didn't have such luxury, but anyway, but that was the point. We knew when we have, no, in other words, there's no point in outstaying your welcome in many respects. So leadership from followers, if you look here, treat followers as partners, share information, risks and rewards, share in goal setting. Clearly so, when we consider leaders and followers are just roles on a team. Add value to followers' productivities, create environments where followers flourish. Don't be a hero, but a hero maker. Okay, fair enough. Leave that to Marvel Comics, but more precisely, the best way of describing that is leading from behind. Break down the barriers, anything that gets in the way of your team succeeding or any of the team members succeeding. Your job as a leader is is like the icebreaker. Plow the channel through and let the team follow through. In this case, I prefer to say lead from behind. It's the most effective way of achieving goals. So understanding why people follow is important to leaders and followers alike. So knowing these motivations, one can design organization environments to attract, accommodate, and retain followers. And again, this comes back again to the context, the followers and leaders themselves. Now, the rest of these are just sayings. Let me see, is there anyone? There was one earlier on there, I forgot, I flicked through it up at the very start, I think it was, yeah, I don't know, it's up at the start. It was from Warren Bennis. And, but essentially, what Bennis, he died a few years back. He was born in 1925. When did he die? Jeez, it was 1970, was it, or something like that? I can't remember what year he died, but he one of these American gurus when it came to writing on management styles and so on. Purple Cross, Purple Heart, and so on and so forth, winner or awardee from the from his military career in Second World War and all that sort of stuff. But he's a great writer of leadership material, probably one of the best around. And his saying was that Western organizations are overmanaged and under-led. And, you know, he couldn't say a truer word. Why? Because we've been heavily influenced on by Western philosophies, thoughts, and management by objectives, hitting goals, and so on. And that's why we have so many measurements and metrics in place for everything we do, for all intents and purposes. So in any organizations, I'm just reading this from the screen here, leaders can help develop effective followers, just as effective followers develop better leaders. So the performance of followers, leaders, and organizations are variables that depend on one another. So they're in other words, complex adaptive systems. So everything is highly interlinked and connected, and it's how those connections function that underpins an organization's maturity. And what develops an organization maturity is its knowledge and its learning capabilities, to not only just survive, but to take market leadership or whatever in particular areas or products and so on. And much and all, as I hate to admit that, or this, but that was the last slide. I am here. Hang on a second. Now I will just close down some of this stuff. And that must have been the fastest performance. 32 slides, and I still have a half an hour with you. Oh, you should see your faces from here. Any questions, folks, or comments? So now, again, it's it's good material. It'll start to raise some questions as well. I mean, some of the obvious questions would be about toxicity in organizations now, and I really don't want to go into the Darth Vader side of life at this hour of the night and go into into the dark side as such, but nevertheless, as you would have those controlling toxic type of leaders or managers in companies, likewise you have those in followers as well. It's the concept of toxicity it started to raise its head around the late 90s in literature, and then academics started to study it more and more, and it's become, let's just say, a popular subject matter in leadership discussions or leadership development and so on. The antichrist that we try to avoid. Unfortunately, it exists, but the fact that we know that it exists, then we know how to possibly manage or control. In the case of is it HP? If a manager was exhibiting any toxic behaviors towards any staff member or team as such, they were put on what was the descriptor? Not a probation, but they were mentored out of their behaviors, their the perceived toxic behaviors. Not all organizations have that same luxury, and it's nice for large multinationals in the private sector as such. Quite a different case in public service as such. And that's why, for example, you would have more trade unionism in public sector than you would in the private sector, largely speaking. It's more so for protection against managerial behavior, so to speak, and for obvious reasons. But without getting into those kind of debates on solidarity and all that, comrades, does anyone have any questions? No?
So, Mark, what you're talking about there, the toxicity, like you like to be fearful follower, like following out of fear.
Yes, that would most definitely be the conformist, and
Okay.
that would be the person who just does as they're told, blindly going along. And then when you take the emotions into account, yes, fear, anxiety, stress, all of the above in various measures, will hit that conformist. That's usually the result of a controlling type boss, or a controlling manager, unfortunately.
And so then a good leader then would be a good follower as well to his manager and his superiors.
Absolutely. It's it's a multi-channel communication or process. So what goes up as well, and usually, the some senior managers in organizations got there usually because of their leadership skills. Now, I'll speak for the private sector. I can't say the same for the public sector, even though I've been in the public sector for the guts of 20 years now, as such. But they are essentially two different worlds, to be honest with you. And in the private sector, you can excel on your competence and leadership styles inside an organization, or your leadership abilities in organizations, because the same leaders can recognize traits in them that got them to the higher levels in an organization. They can see traits in you or in the lower managers that say, this guy is a shaker mover, this guy is good, and so on. We'll nurture that and develop it along, and so on. And that works, and it works effectively. But you don't really have that in the public sector. It's is it right or wrong? I'm not going to comment. To be honest with you, I don't think it's my place to do so. I have my own opinions of it, but that's I shall keep them to myself. For fear, for being a conformist.
I was just about to say, Mark, you can't leave us hanging. You have to go on and say what you want to say.
Let's just say, I've had many battles of conscience with myself. You become in the private sector, you would have become accustomed to ways of working and developed your set of morals and values and so on. And you can find then that when you go to into the public sector, that those values or those how to say, your own guidelines become questionable. And trying to reconcile both. We're talking about the 6 and the 9 here, and there's so many times I had to jump over and back and still not being, I'm being elusive here, but and still not being clear about why that decision was made. And let's be honest, you can bounce off me if you wish, but as we would say, never have I seen the politics so high where the stakes are so low. Does that ring a bell with anyone? No? Have you ever heard that saying? God, I'm getting no takers on that. Yeah, but you can tend to find in some, not all public sectors now, in some arenas, that the politics is just overwhelming, and trying to keep your eye on all the different perspectives and trying to get your heads around them can be a challenge in itself. And sometimes you feel like saying, tell with this is beyond my pay scale, is often my battle cry as a way out, not to get involved or get suckered into scenarios that that might not be favorable. And I'm still not answering your question directly, but I'm giving you some.
That's okay.
Well, on that note, folks, I'm glad I got this. I had a fear actually that this was going to stretch over 2 lectures. I'm glad we're finished. I managed to get through it tonight. There's a lot in there. There's also some good material that you might have a look at on Moodle itself, on followership styles and also on toxicity, leaders and followers. PDF documents, they're under topic 5, I think it is, or topic 6, followership. But certainly worth a read. But it's an area that there's a lot of material now after hitting the shelves, so to speak. And interesting dynamic is how this is evolving with remote working. But I'll not get into that at this hour tonight. But it's interesting, and again, the trust factor has become a big issue. If you've followed this stuff in media and so on, the issue and commentary and debate, you'll find that some companies using software to see if their people are logged in and how long they're staying on for and all this sort of stuff. So this, and are they actually doing their work and the usual stuff, So that's that kind of tracking software. So straight away the trust issue has risen its head again, unfortunately. But we need to go beyond that and say, right, Mark, you have an assignment to do. When will you have it done? I'll have it done at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. Good. That should be good enough. I shouldn't be going in Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and Wednesday morning to see is Mark at his computer working at this or not. Mark says so. There has to be a certain giving of trust to test that Mark can deliver by 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. If he does it then, we say, well, fine, happy days. But that's again. That's that depends totally on the situation, the organization, and of course the type of manager, leader that you're dealing with. Okie dokie, folks. I will let it rest at that and let you off a little bit early than tonight. If you have no other questions or comments. No?
Thank you.
Okie dokie, folks. Catch you next week. Take it easy. Bye bye. Bye bye. You're welcome.